Welcome to the Ripcord Moment. I'm your host, Joe C2. Today, we're joined by Sheryl Bayani-Alzona. She's an attorney with the Employee Benefits Law Group based here in Southern California, just in Los Angeles. And her practice focuses on employee stock ownership plans, known as ESOPs. Sheryl, I'm really excited about our discussion today. You have a very distinct practice in really navigating the subtleties and the nuances and the complexities of ESOPs with your clients. And so I'm really excited to dig into our discussion and hear from you how these tools can really benefit owners as they're contemplating their succession planning. So let's start off at a really high level, and that is, what is this sort of unicorn that's called an ESOP?
Right. Thank you so much, Joe. What a wonderful question. So an ESOP is, as you said, employee stock ownership plan. It is a retirement plan. So, similar to your 401k plan, profit sharing plan, but it is the only retirement plan that is allowed to enter into a loan to purchase employer stock from selling shareholders. So it is designed by Congress to let privately held companies basically internally perpetuate without having to sell to, outside third-party buyers. It is a good benefit, tax-wise for all parties involved, the selling shareholder, the company, and of course, the employees. And it's really designed, there's a special design by Congress. It is in the Internal Revenue Code, and they really thought about this. The governing law also is Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA. So that is also one of the governing laws of ESOPs.
And so if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like ESOPs, I'm guessing, weren't available prior to the ERISA Act in the early 70s. Is that correct?
Well, actually, the first ESOP was established in 1926.
Really?
Yeah, it was actually a peninsula newspaper in San Francisco that first established an ESOP. And then in the 1950s, there are a few more. That's when Louis Kelso started with this idea, of really letting the employees be capitalists themselves. And so he pitched that idea to Russell Long over, and they're the ones that really started with this idea.
Promote this idea. Yep. Okay. Well, let's dig into some of the main benefits to the entrepreneur, the owner. What do you typically see are the main drivers or benefits that they inure through an ESOP?
Yeah, so the main benefit to a selling shareholder really is the ability to defer payment of capital gains. So this is under Section 1042, and I promise I'm not going to bore you with that code section.
Okay, there's no test at the end.
Call it. So it is Section 1042, and really what it is when a shareholder sells to an ESOP, and the ESOP after the sale owns at least 30% of the company, then the selling shareholder could make an election to defer payments of capital gains. Now, of course, there are so many details about this law, but the main things, it only applies to C corporations. And the proceeds, the seller would have to invest in stocks and bonds of domestic corporations. So your mutual funds or municipal bonds, those are out. You're not able to invest in those. But it is definitely a very big tax advantage to the selling shareholders. Now, when we have a discussion with the selling shareholder, we don't just talk about the 1042 benefit, because sometimes it also makes sense to look at if the seller did not take a 1042. Because one other requirement of this 1042 is that you will not be able to be part of the ESOP. But if you don't take advantage of 1042, you can, and your family members can. And so
It
sometimes what
sounds
we
like there's a
do,
trade-off here they have to
it is,
evaluate, right?
it is, right. And
Okay.
so we don't just say, here, take 1042. We have to look at both scenarios and see what benefit, what really would be the benefit to the selling shareholder and to the company of doing an ESOP.
Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point here, right? Which is this notion for an owner looking at their different options, right? Obviously, seeking qualified counsel in you, but also for the financial advisors like ourselves and the qualified tax professionals. I mean, assembling a team that can really help the owner think through all the different variables and the different scenarios to help them really achieve what they're looking to do upon their exit and part of their succession plan.
Absolutely.
Okay, we get this tax benefit. We understand we have to invest in like kind stocks or bonds. It can't be mutual funds, and so there's certain elections that need to be made in this analysis. What are typically the sort of companies that you see, generally speaking, use an ESOP as some sort of exit strategy or perpetuation of the business?
Yeah, so actually there's this organization, it's a national organization that does research. They conduct research about really anything and everything about employee ownership. It's called the National Center for Employee Ownership. And they did a survey back in 2019. This is the latest one that I could find. And that survey said that 21% of ESOPs are in the manufacturing industry.
Okay,
and another
makes sense.
Yeah, and then another 21 is in, the professional industry, like your architects and engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, researchers and all that. So, and then the third one, the third more popular industries that have ESOPs are in the construction industry. And those three really are, it hasn't changed, year after year. I seem to see the same companies in those industries that have ESOPs.
Okay, so it makes sense. I think I can see in the manufacturing and the construction, and so those are sort of like heavy industry, in many ways, sort of labor intensive to some degree. And you can see where you have a lot of employees. I guess the question on the middle one with the architects and the engineers, some of professional service, are there other professional service firms that wouldn't be allowed to participate? And I'm thinking specifically like accounting firms, law firms, financial advisory firms. Okay.
Well, so law firms, definitely it's out. It's really because, the requirement to own a law firm is that you have to be lawyers.
Sure.
An ESOP cannot be a lawyer.
Right.
And because when you have an ESOP, the shareholder becomes the employee stock ownership trust.
Okay.
Not the employees that are underneath it. So even though, I'm going to be a participant in the ESOP and I'm a lawyer, I'm still not the shareholder. It's the ESOP. So that's why they're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
Same thing with doctors. In order for you to have a medical practice, you have to be a doctor.
Okay, so we've talked about sort of the high level benefits, some of the companies that traditionally use them. What are the common pitfalls or some of the sort of nuances, I guess, that owners really need to think through? Because the tax savings sounds wonderful, right? But then there are a lot of requirements it's governed by ERISA that they have to make sure that they're in compliance with. So what are some of these things that an owner really needs to understand?
Yeah, I think really the biggest one is, when you sell, you have to really think about whether the company could afford it. Because
the financing, right?
Financing, yeah. Because so just going into a little bit more details on how this works, right? So when the seller sells to an ESOP, if you think about it, the ESOP doesn't really have money, right?
Right.
It's the trust, right? You need to fund the trust. Who funds the trust? It's not the employees of the company. It is the company that funds the trust.
The cash flow from the business.
Yeah. So the three rules of ESOPs is cash flows, cash flow, cash flow. So, I mean, you really just need to understand that this is what it is. You can't enter into a leverage transaction, meaning, there's just this loan outstanding that's going to cripple the company. You
Meaning,
don't
because the structure is the ESOP goes and gets a loan from the bank that would provide the financing to pay out the shareholder. Is that correct?
So
And
it's
then
actually the company would borrow from the bank.
Okay.
And then the bank would then give the cash to the company. The company would loan that cash to the ESOP.
Okay.
And then the ESOP would give that cash to the selling shareholder.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
That's one structure that you could work with. But sometimes they don't want to go to the bank for whatever reason.
The owner doesn't.
The owner doesn't. The company doesn't. So what happens is the owner could actually say, I'm just carrying the paper on this one. So the ESOP and the selling shareholder could enter into that loan agreement. And so, the seller would then hold the note, and then the company would fund the ESOP every year via contributions, tax deductible contributions. And then the ESOP would use that to make loan payments to the seller.
And do you have a rough percentage, or is there in terms of how many do you see that are financed with a bank loan versus the employer, the owner selling and carrying the note?
I think I see more of the seller carrying the note.
Okay.
Because it really, like I said in the beginning, when you look at it, what will benefit the seller more, 1042 versus non 1042? Because obviously, if you think about it, if it's 1042, the seller would need the cash to invest.
Right.
So that's when you see bank financing being
that makes sense.
Yeah, but if it makes more sense for the seller not to take 1042, then the seller would say, no, I'll take a note. I don't need the cash right now.
Okay.
There could be a down payment just so, some of the loan will be a little bit less overall for the life of the loan, right? If let's say the seller says, okay, I'm going to sell it for 4 million. And the company says, okay, we can afford to fund the ESOP right now with 500,000. The ESOP will pay cash 500,000 to the seller, and then the seller would take 3.5 million of note.
Got it.
So that's what they usually do.
So we've got the cash flow issue in terms of evaluating, right, the structure of the ESOP with the cash flow of the business. Are there any general rules of thumb in terms of looking at the cash flow of the business, whether it's the gross revenue or the EBITDA, and what percentage of the cash flow from the business should be structured to pay for the ESOP payments?
Yeah. So when you look at a transaction, so let's say we actually call our analysis an ESOP suitability review.
Okay.
Basically looking at everything, is an ESOP right for you? That's really what we're trying to answer. And when we say you, it doesn't just mean the seller. It means the seller, the company, and the employees. So when we look at this and we say, okay, the ESOP seems to be right for you, we then go into how much can the company afford, right? And that's where the transaction design happens. And in that design, you could say, okay, the company can only afford $500,000 every year.
Per year.
And then we could either back out from that number, right? Okay, this is all we can afford. So how much loan does that, give us? So we kind of just back down from that number. But most of the time, we look at, tax returns, we look at financial statements, and like you said, EBITDA, that is a big indication of value.
Okay, sure.
So when, typically the ESOP could pay 4 or 5 times EBITDA. That's like a good indication
That's
of
a pretty typical structure.
Yeah, typical structure. We've seen, it's probably not going to be, you're probably not going to see like an 8 times EBITDA. I mean, sometimes it happens, but not likely. Because in the ESOP, one of the requirements is that the ESOP as a buyer, they're not able to pay more than fair market value or adequate consideration.
Yeah.
So, you really can't say my company is worth 8 times, EBITDA. But the valuation, an independent valuation hired by the buyer, the trustee of the ESOP, is going to say, but I can only pay you 5x. So thus there is still negotiation. I'm not saying, this is it. There's some levers that could be pulled, and it's really a buy and sell. There's some negotiation.
Well, and that actually leads me to my next sort of question, which is, right, we're in a market right now, right, with interest rates being low, and multiples in many industries are just many times over 8, right? 15, 20. I mean, whether it's obviously looking to the public markets, but even in the private markets. And so talk to us a little bit about this idea of maybe a partial ESOP coupled with a later exit, perhaps to a strategic or a financial buyer, that might actually help the owner achieve other objectives.
Yeah, so that is definitely a possibility. As I mentioned, the ESOP is a ready buyer, and it is perhaps the only buyer who is willing to take a minority interest. So we actually have done this to several of our clients, where the ESOP is only a minority shareholder.
No, they typically above the 30% though, for the benefit of the 1042, or
yeah. So typically it's 30. Sometimes some are at 49%, but definitely still holding minority interest.
Yep.
And so year one, let's say, Bob sells to the ESOP, takes 1042. The ESOP owns 30%.
Yeah.
And then right after the transaction, the company takes converts to an S corporation. So elects to be taxed as an S corporation. So the seller got the advantage of 1042, no payment of capital gains. In year two, beginning in year two, the company now will take advantage of not paying taxes on the 30% that the ESOP owns.
Okay.
Just a little bit of a background on S corporation ESOPs, because an S corporation is really, it passes through, the taxes passes through from the company to the shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? In an ESOP, the shareholder becomes the ESOP trust.
Right.
The ESOP trust doesn't pay taxes.
Right. Because it's like, you think of like a 401k, because it's under ERISA.
It's under ERISA, hence it's, it passes through to the ESOP. That 30% you don't have to pay taxes on. So imagine how you could grow the company without paying taxes, right?
There's substantial benefits to the sort of the cash flow of the business itself.
Correct.
In growth mode, having an ESOP as one of the shareholders.
Correct. And, part of the analysis that we do is comparing a 30% S corporation ESOP versus 100% S corporation ESOP, which, as you can imagine, is a tremendous benefit. But going back to the original question, so let's say, year two, 30% S corporation ESOP, and now you're making more money, right? Because you don't have to pay taxes,
right,
on that part. And let's say in year 4, there's a buyer, you grew the company because of all these tax savings. And in year 4, there is a buyer that is ready to pay you this tremendous multiple of your EBITDA.
Because now you're getting a third party strategic or a financial buyer who's coming in and offering a much higher multiple.
So you're, as a strategic buyer, it can pay a premium, something that an ESOP cannot.
Right.
No, it's an ESOP is an investor, it's not a strategic buyer. So imagine, the ESOP owning 30%, the shareholder owning the rest of it, 70%. Yeah. And when you get 18x EBITDA, there's a win-win for both,
for everybody,
the ESOP and the selling shareholder.
Yeah.
So it is, that is a structure that some of the selling shareholders have designed. I'm going to hold on to a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe we can pivot to the employees, right, or the participants in the plan. Obviously, the structure, there's a trustee that administers the plan, and so they're a fiduciary. But if I'm an employee and I'm participating in this plan and I've worked for X number of years and I'm ready to, let's just say that hypothetically, how do I exit the plan? And I mean, I'm assuming I just tender my shares back to the plan and I go off into retirement. And it's like is it like any other retirement plan in the sense that at that point, can I take my interest and roll it over to like an IRA rollover if I don't want to pay ordinary income tax at that time?
Yep, exactly. Okay. So it is, that's part of the design, as a retirement plan. If you retire from the company, then you could elect to, take your money, roll it over to an IRA and not pay taxes until, whenever. And it is subject to, required minimum distribution. So same things that your 401k plans and profit sharing plans. Yep. So there is that ability. And so that's why it is, the pre-tax equity sharing tool, right? If you think about it, because the employees don't pay anything until they are ready to take it out. And, at that point, the company is required to purchase them out.
That actually brings up an interesting point. Before we pivot to the action items, before we get there, one other question, and that is, what is kind of a typical vesting schedule for an ESOP?
A typical vesting schedule is a 6-year graded. That is the maximum that you could do in an ESOP. So basically starting to vest at 20% on your second year of working 1,000 hours.
Okay.
And then 20% each year after that, and until you reach the 6-year 100% vesting.
And then one other question on that, in terms of allocation of shares, I'm assuming there's pretty strict rules around governance of how shares are allocated within an ESOP. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, it is. Like I said, it's a qualified retirement plan. So it does need to be, it cannot benefit highly compensated employees. So a safe harbor way, a safe way to allocate contributions is pro rata to compensation.
Okay.
You don't need to do really any additional testing. Okay. You could also do allocation, allocation rate groups, which is done more typically in your 401k or profit sharing plans. But doing it that way, you'll need to do other non-discrimination tests.
Got it. All right. Well, Sheryl, look, we call this the Ripcord Moment. We're going to wrap it up in the next kind of 5 minutes here. But the reason I call it that, right, is I believe that when owners go to exit their business, it's a little bit like jumping out of an airplane, right? And their parachute can't fail. Their ripcord better be working. And so I always ask our guests to share 2 action items that owners, our audience, can contemplate doing sooner than later. And in this case, if an owner is intrigued by an ESOP or seriously considering it, what are your 2 action items that owners in our audience should start doing sooner than later?
Yeah, so definitely, go through the ESOP suitability review process with us. So I think you really need to, like you said, dive in there and make sure that before you adopt an ESOP, before you establish an ESOP, you know exactly what you're getting. Let there be no surprises.
Yeah.
And so we'll walk you through that. We'll guide you through that.
And real quick on something like that, I mean, just from a time standpoint, how long does a suitability process or procedure take for an owner? Ballpark.
Ballpark. So I would say about 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
And really it's, 2 weeks of gathering information, you give it to us, and then another 2 weeks we'll go through it, and then we set up a meeting. It's going to be about a 2-hour meeting, and basically really going through, what we see. Are there ESOP stoppers?
Okay.
Or can we say, no, don't do an ESOP, you're too small, or you don't have enough cash flows? We could talk about these things. And then after that, we, write up a report for the company and the selling shareholder, and basically laying out the options.
Okay.
So, and their own action items.
Right.
What they need to work on.
Got it. Thank you for the clarity on that. So one action item is the suitability. And then the second one would be?
Call me.
Call you. All right. That's an easy one. I love it. Well, that's a great pivot.
I'm a simple gal. So
that's a great pivot to, if somebody in our audience does want to get a hold of you, Sheryl, how do we do that?
It's this is our specialty. This is all that we do. Employee benefits law. That's why we're called Employee Benefits Law Group. We are the largest ESOP consulting and legal practice in Southern California. I'm even going to claim that, Western United States.
Western United States. So what's your direct line if somebody does want to call you and is intrigued by an ESOP?
Yes. So my direct line is 310-571-8896. And I do answer my phone, when I'm here, when I'm available.
You do. I know that.
Yeah. So I will definitely answer the call.
Yeah. Well, Sheryl, thank you for taking the time to be with us today to really share your specialized knowledge in this area that I think is it's definitely worth exploring for many potential owners to consider the pros and the cons. At least they're educated with the knowledge if this is potentially the right strategy for them. So great talking to you. I always enjoy our conversations because I'm always learning something from you, Sheryl. And we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. This is Joe C2 signing off from the Ripcord Moment, and we'll see you next time.